We're we're live, Timothy.
I'm so happy. Oh, here we go. Good morning, Maya.
Good morning, Timothy. Did you hear the sound of the introduction?
Richard Berger's intro, fantastic.
Great. I'm happy you did. So, good morning to you. Thank you very much for coming once again to the show and
I'm coming
for
to you live from downtown Katsuyama.
great. And I can see that beautiful view. So,
Yep,
with the boats and the hawks behind.
the
Yes,
Seahawks.
the Seahawks too. Yes. So, there have been a lot of things happening during this week, right? The session of
It's
the
been a very active week. Yes,
yes,
lots
it's
going
over.
on.
Yes, a lot of things going on, and a lot of news about what is going to happen in the next couple of months. Of course, some of the news is, of course, about well, it's just predictions, but we are going to see which one of them will happen in reality and which ones will not. So let's see how
Yep,
and what is going on.
let's get into it.
Yes, to everybody who is listening to us on Clubhouse, we have Timothy Langley with us once again. Good morning to you who joined us. And Timothy Langley is reporting from Katsuyama, which is in Chiba on the other side of the Tokyo Bay. He
Mhm.
has prepared his presentation about the Japanese politics during the past 1 week, and we are going to have a lot of news delivered to us this morning. So please stay with us, and of course, after he finishes his presentation on Clubhouse on StreamYard, I'm sorry, he's going to join us on Clubhouse, and we're going to have a discussion here. So please prepare your comments and questions, and stay with us. Timothy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maya, and thank you everybody who's in the audience. We have found that this dual platform loading up on LinkedIn for the 30-minute, maybe 40-minute presentation on what the briefing is, and then moving over into Clubhouse for the Q&A is a good recipe for us. We had about 250 people who viewed the LinkedIn presentation, which is online last week, which is just really encouraging for both of us, Maya. The audience continues to grow, and I just encourage people who are on the show, link in with Maya and me so that we can stay connected. If you have issues or questions or you want us to cover something, please just message us on LinkedIn. We're on it pretty frequently. And we come to you every Sunday morning for a show on what's going on in Japanese politics. So without any further delay, let's talk about what's going on. Top of the line is Prime Minister Kishida. He just closed the Diet, the 150, it's in the Constitution, 150-day session of the Diet. The both houses must convene a 150-day session every year. The Diet is opened and closed by the Emperor, who shows up. That happened on Wednesday. And there is a lot that was building up to the closure. And then after the closure, it was just incredibly busy. This all happened in the span of just 1 week. So since the last time we were together to today, there's just, like Maya said, there's just an incredible amount of news to talk about. The Kishida administration is still coming up good in the polls. The approval rating for the cabinet, a poll was done that was, the results were released this week on the cabinet approval. It's still it's about 55% approval rating. The trajectory of approval is beginning to tone down a little bit. The trajectory is not as high. I think the trajectory we will find when they do the poll in 2 weeks on the prime minister himself, that trajectory will continue to increase. He's probably one of the most popular prime ministers in recent history. Of course, we had Shinzo Abe for 10 plus years. but even before him, Kishida is doing really well. He has that look of just a, a solid, typical businessman. You could put him on the board of Toyota or any of these big companies, and he would look perfectly at ease there. So he's got that presence. He's not as dynamic as maybe some Westerners wished a national leader was, but he's doing a pretty darn good job. A lot of that is spillover from Mr. Suga and from Mr. Abe's administration. And just as we discussed last week, just the confluence of situations that just really give him a boost that maybe he doesn't deserve. He hasn't quite earned it, but he is getting it. He's in the medium 60 percentile points of public approval. The cabinet, on the other hand, is beginning to take a little bit, it's not taking much of a hit, but the trajectory is beginning to lessen. And that's because of what's going on with the yen. The yen is weakening day by day. It's 135, 24-year low point for the yen. It's causing a lot of concern, and yet the Bank of Japan is still kind of digging their heels in, while the Federal Reserve in the United States just increased their interest rate by the largest amount in 15 years or so. The Federal Reserve chairman announced that, I think, on Friday. It might have been Thursday. So there's a lot going on internationally with regard to currency fluctuations and particularly the value of the yen. Among the G20 countries, Japan is the one that is kind of the outlier on keeping a easy money policy, whereas the others are tightening up the money supply. What that tells us, there's a couple of things that tells us in terms of predictions and projections, is that many people say it's already happened, but the United States is likely headed towards a recession. And when you raise interest rates and you make money a little bit more difficult, especially in this current economy, it does have a tendency to trigger a recession. And sometimes having a recession, is medicine for calming down inflation. So it's one of those tools. It needs to be very finely tuned. So the United States looks like it's going in that direction, and many economists predict that's going to happen in this next quarter. For the Japanese, they're keeping money loose so that the economy can keep on going. There's a lot of stimulus money floating around, and there's a lot of ideas on how to continue to boost the economy, and I'm going to talk about those today. But closing up the diet, it was very successful this year. I think probably you could say this is one of the most successful diet sessions in maybe 8 or 10 years. They passed 61 bills this year. That's an enormous number of bills. They created two major bills. One was the economic security legislation, and the other one didn't receive much fanfare, and sorry, it didn't receive a whole lot of airtime here, was the Children's Agency. We've talked about that before. We talked about the traction, the appeal that the LDP gets when it talks about children and saving children and being good to children and creating some sort of a better platform. The way children are handled now is split over 6 or 7 different ministries: the Justice Ministry, the Police Ministry, the Child Welfare, the Social Services, that sort of thing. And it is, a lot of kids and a lot of families with kids, a lot of under the economic level, families are suffering. And so they've come up with this plan. It was a balloon floated up just before Mr. Suga became prime minister. It was kind of laughed at because we understand the voting people kind of acknowledged that it was just a ploy to appeal to the voters. This is a legislation that is highly endorsed by Komeito, which is the coalition party of the LDP. And they got that. They got what they wanted, and there was some horse trading as a result of that. And the results of the horse trading becomes available and kind of noticeable to us, although the direct strings are not always obvious. But that comes out, as legislation rolls on and as we move towards the election. So with the election coming up, That starts next Wednesday. So you will start to hear the sound trucks as they go through Tokyo talking about, different candidates and their appeal and the white gloves and the girls with the microphones waving. There will also be uh, plywood boards placed all over the neighborhoods with the candidates' names for the districts that they're running in. So you'll begin to see that coming up this next week too. So it will be very active. And the prime minister has also been very active leading up to the election. So once the election starts, so the diet has closed up, there's a week of space there, and then election campaigning starts. In between that period, and even while the diet is in session, you're somewhat relegated to not be campaigning. You're supposed to be running the government. Mr. Kishida took time out this week to visit the Toyota plant and spend time with Mr. Toyota, who is the chairman there, who's also I think he is the chairman of Keidanren, but appealing to not just the executives there, who are in the main LDP supporters, but also to the workers who are in the main Democratic People's Party candidate voters. In fact, in Toyota, they have one of the members of the union there who is actually running for a seat. And the laborers and the workers, especially in the automobile factories. So, as you know, Japan is widely touted as being, a machine of growth and an economic powerhouse. That's mostly because of the automobile industry. So the prime minister physically visiting Toyota, Honda, Nissan just this last week and appealing to the people who work there is a pretty big deal. He received a little bit of criticism for that. It's kind of like electioneering. This next campaign is critically important for Mr. Kishida and for the LDP because they have a raft of things that they want to do. We had the diet closed down on Wednesday. There was a big conclave. You might have seen it on NHK where they had 9 opposition parties and Mr. Kishida on a panel discussion talking about policy, talking about direction, about views, about Article 9, that sort of thing. And it was really revealing. A lot of issues were challenged by opposition parties, and opposition parties put out their ideas as well, so the whole population can see it. There were a couple of really good things. Most people, I think, in our audience are not going to, download and watch that tit-a-tat. But there was a lot of talk about the consumption tax. One of the ways to provide relief to the Japanese people is to take the consumption tax, which is at 10% now, to reduce to maybe 5% or just eliminate it for 4 or 5 months was one of the other proposals. And so with the inflation really starting to creep in heavily, in fact, they did a poll this last week, which was also released, that said 70% of Japanese companies plan on raising their prices this year. That 70% includes those who have already raised their prices, but it goes up until April of next year. So if they haven't raised their prices, they plan on raising their prices within the next 10 months. And this is something of a shock to people. One of the favorite things that people love to see in Japan is the 100 yen shop, the 100 yen shop. They're very popular, clean. They have all sorts of services. It's much more highbrow and Tony than what you might see in other countries, for example, the dollar store. They're very popular, but it looks like their time might come to an end because for offering products at 100 yen when paying, for imported goods in yen that are being charged in dollars, it is becoming just unsupportable, unsustainable. So it looks like that is one of the other hits that you can anticipate coming forward, but there are a lot of other things too. Sanai Takaichi came on television on Thursday, the day after the diet closed, to talk about Japan, the LDP's policy statement for the election. So they waited for the diet to close, and then Takaichi is the policy chief within the LDP. She's the one that's kind of managing what the policy is going to be for the candidates, how they're going to speak, What are their issues? What's the sequence of issues that they're going to talk about when they get on top of these sound trucks and hold the microphone? And one of the issues that she pushed hard for was defense spending. So we've been talking about Japan moving from 1% to 2% of GDP. And a lot of times this is a trial balloon. How does it come up? How do the people view that? Is there much criticism? Is the opposition party really angry about this expansion? And we haven't even touched the Japanese constitution yet. But this policy that was being talked about now is one of the platforms for the LDP. So after the election, and the LDP is scheduled to win. We don't know how big they're going to win, but they're not going to lose. In the current situation, the LDP is not going to lose. They're going to at least have parity with what they have now. That would be viewed as a failure of the Kishida administration. So it is going to win, and the value of the Kishida push on that will be calibrated by how much they win. But the point here is that the things that they say in their policy statements and the things that the candidates say is when the LDP wins the election, then they will come up guaranteed and they'll say, because we have this mandate, this powerful mandate from the people, we need to move forward on our campaign promises. Guaranteed that's what's going to happen. So defense spending is going to be more robust. They're also talking about more emphasis on diplomacy, global diplomacy, and also regional diplomacy. And kind of like a trial balloon, not quite, but you've seen ever since the Kishida administration started, he's been pushing on being in foreign fora. He's been at a lot of different international symposiums and events. During Golden Week, he made that 6-nation tour. He made a major policy speech in London. He talked about new capitalism, which is becoming a lot more firmer now since we're through the diet session. He went to Shangri-La just this last week. He really did a good showing in Shangri-La, by the way. He came up with 5 policy statements that he is going to pursue in his administration. And whenever the prime minister says this, we have a couple of examples of that. When he went to London, he talked about new capitalism. There were some things that he said that had a resonance to them. There were some that weren't very well defined and probably contained some maybe sleight of hand or maybe some tossaways, but they appeal to maybe the foreign audience. It depends on who he's talking to. But he did say that he is going to maintain and strengthen the rules-based international order. So that's one of the commitments that he's going to make as prime minister, as Japan, moves forward under his administration. That's pillar number 1. He's going to enhance defensive capabilities. That's pole number 2. He wants nuclear proliferation to be a keystone of Japan's policy, and it wants to be a leader and a kind of a spokesman for that. It has a unique position of having that role, him being from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of course, being the 2 countries that, the only 2 countries that suffered from a nuclear explosion. So they do have some reason to say that. On the other hand, there is a nuclear non-proliferation conclave, a big one, that's being held in in Vienna next week. And Japan isn't even sending an observer. The documents to send an observer were basically rejected or ignored. Maybe it's because of the election, maybe it's because of other things, but building onto that pronouncement that we want to be the nuclear non-proliferation spokesperson for the world, sometimes rings a little bit hollow, especially when you think about defense capabilities. And one of the things that Takaichi said was that Japan needs to have first strike capabilities, which is a really big deal. So when you think about defense spending, when you think about how much money things cost, there's a certain calibration. And one of the more expensive ones is to be so attuned to what's going on in your enemy's territory that you can anticipate things. So that means defense intel capabilities and also being able to deliver some sort of a missile or some sort of a detonation so that you destroy the capabilities before they happen. That's really expensive. So you begin to understand Japan's push towards more defensive capabilities, 2% of the national budget, 2% of the GDP being dedicated to defense. There's something going on here. So you need to keep a careful eye on it. Guaranteed, the Constitution will be revised. Mr. Kishida mentioned this in the conclave on NHK, where people were talking about the revision of the Constitution. He also said that this revision of the Constitution needs to happen sooner rather than later. He was supported in that by Ishin no Kai, which is the political party centered in Osaka that's really making inroads. It is going to be probably the largest opposition party after this next election. We'll see. But they've also endorsed the change of the Constitution. And the key here, at least in the arguments that were presented, was that even in the Constitution, the existence of the self-defense forces is not explicit. The self-defense forces exist, they have a budget, but in the Constitution, it's not specifically allowed that this self-defense forces can exist in the current form that it is. And so one of the arguments is we need to revise the Constitution to accommodate for their existence. And one of the reasons that people describe why the SDF is kind of meek and mild. I mean, you almost never see self-defense forces personnel dressed in their uniforms on the streets in public places. Usually when they go to the Ministry of Defense, they keep their uniforms in their lockers. That inability for them to feel pride and to expose themselves as patriots for the country, it's muted as a consequence of that. So they would like to repair that. They would like to get more people involved in defense work. If they're going to increase the defense budget by 100%, not only is it money, it's also personnel. And with the declining birth rate and the number of people who are actually in the workforce, that's a tough ticket to cover. Anyway, that was the third pillar of his policy delivered in Shangri-La. It was a keynote speech, by the way, so he got great coverage. The fourth one is to strengthen the UN. There's been a lot of debate on the UN, particularly with their inability to do anything about what's going on in Ukraine. Japan, as we talked last week, did receive another 2-year extension of its non-permanent status in the Security Council. It would like to have permanent status and maybe even be one of the members who has a veto power. There are 5 members that have veto power, and as a consequence of that, nothing was done about North Korean rockets and nothing was done about Ukraine invasion. So he's dedicated to in strengthening the UN. And finally, he wants to strengthen international cooperation and participate in new policy initiatives, for example, in economic security and the environment. So these pronouncements telegraph what to expect in the near term, and I think they're reliable. He didn't talk much about his concept of new capitalism. It's still a little bit squishy there. In some of his pronouncements, in explaining that, it's focused a lot on investment and on green energy and on building this ecosystems for startups to thrive. But it really doesn't get into the dynamics of that. How do you distribute risk among a population that is very risk averse? How do you force companies who have been hoarding money? There was a promise, or a verbal promise, that if we leave you alone so that you can rake in profits, that you will distribute that to your workforce and raise salaries and that sort of thing. That was made 10 years ago. Nobody ever did that. The companies continue to hoard money. And so that's one of the reasons why the prices, the wages have not improved. So he is dedicated, I feel, to raising wages. There are a couple of techniques that he can do to do that. He's just a little bit soft on that because the election is in, 25 days, 20 days? So he needs to be careful. But like I've always said on this program, wait till after the election, and then a lot of things will be revealed to us. It'll be a little bit more understandable, a little bit more predictive, and also some actions will be taken. So that's something to look forward to. There's a lot going on with the current prime minister. COVID and tourism, the two are tightly tied together. You know that tourism is beginning to boom all over the world, and there are news reports of people flooding in to the airports, and the airport staff is just unprepared for it. There have been some really dramatic footage of people lining for blocks and blocks outside of airports with their luggage because the personnel and the procedures, it just happened so quickly. Uh, I guess that happens. It happens here in Japan too. Um, Japan's problem, though, is not that people are flooding to the airports with their suitcases and being delayed because of worker shortage. Uh, Tourism is beginning, but it's just not there yet. It's kind of like we're just testing, we're just kind of pretending right now. Kishida said earlier that June would be the month where tourism would open, and it has, but it's not quite the full truth. It is open with restrictions, and those requirements for tour guides on tourists who are coming under their umbrella were only released 2 weeks ago. And people who are planning a trip to Japan the first time in 2.5 years, they need more than 2 weeks for preparing for that trip, or maybe even thinking, I'm not going to go because I don't have real freedom. I have to be watched by the tour guides. I'm going to be closely monitored. I have to wear my mask. Who the hell wants to do that when I'm on vacation? So although the doors are open, there are requirements that tourists have to come in under the auspices of a tour guide. So you have to sign up, you have to pay, and then you have to follow their instructions. And those tour guides are liable for your performance and the fact that you have the shots and that you keep, socially distanced, that sort of thing. So the doors are open, but just a little bit. The procedures for people coming in, 20,000 now are allowed into Japan. The business travelers are increasing. And for those people who are in the room or in the audience who have friends who have traveled, the stores are all over the place. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 hours to get through. Sometimes people are just whisked right through. It's almost as if back to normal. But that's because I think the administration of the airports are going through their own procedures to guarantee complete safety. One of the things that the prime minister can't really stand is to have an uptick in COVID cases where he's unprepared for that, because that was the real demise of Mr. Suga. And the fast action and the quick decisiveness of the current administration is one of the reasons why his poll numbers are so high. So the tourism is coming. You can expect that foreign tourists will come in droves, probably in July. It will pick up. And I think by August, we will be back to normal, assuming all things go better. Tourism is not just for the foreigners, it's also for the Japanese too. And you will remember the very popular, what would you call it, discount service for tourism. So apparently tourism is such a trigger for the economy. It doesn't support all of the economy, but it's a barometer, and it has a overflow effect in other parts of the economy for restaurants, for different kinds of services. So the Japanese government really puts a lot of emphasis and effort on that. And we had the go-to travel, you might recall, under the Suga administration. It only lasted about 6 months because he launched it, and then we had COVID come in a second wave, and they put it on hold. And now the decision is that they're going to cancel it. You're not going to hear go-to travel anymore. It's coming under a different name, under different kinds of parameters. It is now called, what is it called? Minkan Wari? I think Minkan Wari. So that means it's based on different prefectures, and even just before now, within the prefecture, the governor was able to modify some form of go-to travel for the people who live in the prefecture to travel within the prefecture. Tokyo has its own program that it launched maybe last month, and that will go on afterburners moving forward. And the government has also enhanced the amount of money that you can get per day for travel. For overnight, it's a little bit more. And if it's on the weekdays rather than the weekends, it's even more than that. So they're really trying to jigger this the economy by having people travel more, by giving them more hope and inspiration, having people travel around, spend some of their money, and to re-trigger the economy. So a lot is going on there, and you can anticipate hearing much more about it. I don't think you're going to hear the trouble at the airports that many of the world capitals are suffering from. It'll be much more muted here, but I think the Japanese airport authority and JAL, that sort of thing, they haven't lost as many employees that kept them on furlough in any event. So I don't think you're going to have that kind of a problem. There's been a lot of action going on with South Korea. If you're following the news, the new President Moon is really bent on having a better relationship with Japan, and I think that is something that he learned as a consequence of how little progress was made during under the Moon administration. Excuse me, the Park administration. In fact, the foreign minister of South Korea to Japan, he's turning in his credentials. His 1.5-year term is done because we have a new president now, a new foreign minister. And this ambassador to Japan met with the foreign minister, Hayashi, just this last week for the first time. So he's been in the country for a year and a half and hasn't even met the foreign minister. He's presented his credentials, obviously, but hasn't had a meeting with the foreign minister, and certainly not with the prime minister. So with the installment of a new foreign minister and also the appointment of a new ambassador, he's already been named. He's on his way here. There's a lot of anticipation that this relationship between Japan and South Korea will be mended, will be repaired. It's difficult, it's tough. The Japanese are still standing back a little bit because we've been here before, and the Korean government came in with more criticism, more demands for payment for what happened during the colonization period, and the issue known as comfort women. It always flares up. It's always there. The new idea being floated out is that there will be a fund set up by Japan and South Korea to compensate these people who have been damaged and have lawsuits going against the Japanese government, even though these lawsuits were settled in agreements that were signed several years ago. The issue still doesn't go away. And the idea is that this fund will be used to pay compensation to these parties. And the only way to get get Japan to agree to it is to make the fund, not compulsory, but voluntary. People are trying hard to overcome this issue. It's important not just for Japan Korea relations, but also for what the United States needs to do in this region with Quad, with what's going on in North Korea, what's going on in Taiwan. So the United States is really focusing its efforts in this area. You might not see it much if you're following what the president is doing, but if you're following what the defense relationships are doing, it's becoming very evident. So there's a lot going on with South Korea. North Korea, as you know, has fired 28 missiles this year. That's a record number. It looks like they're intending to set detonation for a nuclear device. If that happens, that's going to incur a lot of repercussions. And I think it's going to enhance this drive to revise Article 9 of the Constitution. So as soon as something critical like that happens, you can anticipate that the LDP will move very swiftly, both houses of the parliament, to pass legislation, a referendum to change the Constitution, and then that referendum will be offered to the Japanese population. For that to move, for that to really have a chance of success, something needs to happen, something kind of alarming, something shocking to the sensibilities. And then you can anticipate that Article 9, not only Article 9, but the Constitution, there are about 7 issues that are hot on the change agenda. Those will be addressed. The elections, as we talked about, will be starting next Wednesday to culminate on July 10th. And after those elections, there'll be a vetting of, who won, who lost, who did well, that sort of thing. And then you can anticipate that the Kishida administration will shuffle their cabinet. Typically, when something like this happens, there are a lot of people who deserve ministerial portfolios. If you've been in the government and you've survived 5 elections, you're due to become a minister. And there's an overpopulation of those people who have survived 5 elections, sometimes 6 or 7, who don't have a cabinet portfolio, and they deserve it and they want it. So, typically in a cabinet reshuffle, excuse me, you'll have 4, maybe 4 ministers shuffled. 5 or 6 it's almost too much, but you can be assured that the prime minister will shuffle the cabinet probably in the first week after the election results are offered. You're going to see a lot of action after that. We actually have 2 more briefings before that happens, so there's plenty of us for us to talk about. And then after the elections, we can do an analysis on that. But we'll continue to follow that very, very carefully. Remember, we've always talked about scandal in Japanese politics. It is an essential element of how politics is run here, especially around election time. There are 3 scandals that are kind of percolating. They always come up at this time of the year or this season, and they actually carry a disproportionate amount of weight in terms of swaying voters. So if people are sitting on the fence and they're not sure if they like somebody or dislike them, if you have an article or a story that comes out of Bunshun or one of the other weekly magazines, it can be devastating to that candidacy. So the first one I want to talk about is the campaign by Bunshun to criticize the Speaker of the House, Mr. Hosoda. And the allegations were that he's got proclivities about taking his advantage of his position and his power in the Diet, in the lower house, and also his long-term position within factional politics, to invite reporters or young female Diet members to come visit him in his residence after hours. This happens quite a bit. It's not always nefarious, but they put a team on him and took photos and lambasted him for 4 articles consecutively in Bunshun on a weekly basis. He hasn't really responded. He's responded in some form about that, but he is, attending to his public duties. I've seen him in 2 or 3 different Hagemasu-kai, Benkyo-kai, over the last 2 weeks. And what he's decided to do is sue Bunshun for disparagement and for harassment. So that issue is going to come on. I think that's probably the right position to take. It doesn't really address the issues, but it is something that's come up just before elections. The second one is that a member of Mr. Kishida's faction, a young member, a male, single, first term, was caught. So one of these scandal magazines, it wasn't Bunshun this time, it was Shincho, heard about his proclivity to date younger girls, and he had a certain MO, and he was pursuing that MO. Apparently he had drinks with an 18-year-old girl, and then from there went into a hotel. And this hit the newspaper, not the newspaper, the magazine, and it became a big issue. And he's in Mr. Kishida's faction, so you know that there's some political motivation there. There was a huge cry for him to, first of all, quit the Kishida faction, which reduces Mr. Kishida's numbers by 1. This is a big deal. It's really a difficult thing for Mr. Kishida to do. But there was also cries for it, this particularly pregnant time, forgive the choice of words, as the Diet session was closing and a lot of action and a lot of eyeballs on what's going on there for this issue to come up. It's just one of those things that Mr. Kishida has to deal with. There was a call for him to actually resign from the Diet. But when you think about it, yes, and if this scandal came up at this time last year, when 18-year-olds were not considered adults, they are now considered adults. It would have been a far more scandalous issue. You know, he's a child robber, he's a molester. But they passed legislation that acknowledged that kids that are 18 years old have the same rights as adults, with the exception of they can't gamble, they can't smoke, and they can't drink alcohol. So on one level, he's a bachelor, he was dating a girl, kind of who cares, but the fact that he plied her with liquor, I don't know if plied is the right word, but they drank first and then went to a hotel. He's holding his ground, actually. He's not going to resign from the Diet. If he does resign from the Diet, he's in his 30s. That means he's not going to get another job. He's not going to be able to rerun for election. He's kind of out of luck. So I think he's going to hold his position and take the hits, but time will tell. But it is election period, so these kinds of things happen. And finally, Mr. Abe, once again in the news for his Sakura Mirukai. That's the annual event at Shinjuku Gyoen, where everybody and their brother goes, if you're invited, to view the cherry blossoms with the prime minister. This has been a tradition of the Abe administration. I've been 4 or 5 times. It's a big event. And they have they serve sake there. You eat little bento, everything's service, and you get invited to it. You don't pay for it. And a citizens group has come up just this last week with a lawsuit to sue the prime minister for violation of the campaign funds, saying that this is election campaigning, that he is purchasing votes by providing especially alcohol. You're not supposed to do that under Japanese law. So that's the third scandal that's kind of brewing up now. I'd like to move on. There will be potentially other things going on, another scandal perhaps this next week. The next 2 weeks are really important, so keep your eye out for that, and I will too. There are a couple of unfortunate things that happened. We reported last week that the Supreme Court ruled that the people that suffered from the Fukushima disaster are not able to claim damages from the Japanese government for the damages they suffered. The argument was there were 4 different lawsuits impacting about 3,500 people who claimed that the loss that they suffered, not only pain and anguish, but also their homes, their livelihood, they should be able to sue the Japanese government and TEPCO, the administrator, the energy producer that had the nuclear reactors that was producing the energy, for their damages. Not a whole lot of money. I mean, the damage suit was for maybe $300 million, split up among 3,700 people for their damages. The Supreme Court rejected that claim and said that the state doesn't have liability. They did their work. They couldn't foresee a tsunami of that degree from that direction to produce that kind of impact. So they've taken the state out of that. The Supreme Court did just this last week, and that leaves TEPCO holding the bag. So the suit will now continue on to identify TEPCO as the builder, as the evaluator, as the company that put the machinery in place. And as a result of those decisions, the disaster that we had suffered tenfold because of the nuclear explosion. The second unfortunate thing that happened was that you remember the Sri Lankan girl who was in the Nagoya detention center. She had overstayed her visa and they had her in detention. They kept her in detention for about almost a year, um, and she was in detention for 3 months. She began to complain of health issues. She wanted to be released. She didn't want to be um, deported back to Sri Lanka. She made an appeal for amnesty, which was under consideration but likely to be rejected. So she was just in a holding pen in kind of a no man's land. She died in her cell because of medical complications. The family came in and they sued the government. The government um, decided just this week, the prosecutor's office. So when you have an issue like this, you go to the public prosecutor's office. You say, I have a complaint against this government facility. And it's the public prosecutor's office who pursues your claim on your behalf. And so they initiated the suit against the Nagoya Immigration Bureau. And this week, they withdrew their suit, saying, we really can't tell. It's hard to prove. We're not going to be able to champion your issue. Sorry about that. Your daughter died. Your sister died in detention. They couldn't have foreseen it. They didn't have the medical facilities. They kind of didn't know what they were doing, so they get a pass. That's rather unfortunate. So they still have civil liabilities that they can pursue. But from time to time, these kinds of things hit the news. It does seem kind of unfortunate that decisions like this are made. It's nice to watch them because you learn how Japan moves, how Japanese society works, how the Supreme Court views the role of government and views the role of citizens, and how it distributes that equitably. So it's something to keep an eye on because it has great impact on what we do, how we do business, our decisions in staying in this country and investing in this country. So I report on it from time to time, and it's keenly interesting to me. The yen has taken a fall. It is now at this 24th year lowest. It's scratching 135. It is predicted to go lower. The economy is beginning to be shaky. The prime minister is holding true to Mr. Kuroda, who's the president of the Bank of Japan. He's got another year in his tenure, and he is most likely going to stay there. There are two candidates are beginning to vie. This is very uncool. It's very undiplomatic. It's unbecoming while your boss is still in position to begin to promote yourself. Kono Taro got into a little bit of trouble for jumping the gun, you might remember. But you've got two candidates that are beginning to kind of polish up their image, not quite polish up their resume, not float it out as a candidate, but they are beginning to make significant moves. This will be in April of next year, by the way. But he's holding true to the loose monetary policy. The Bank of Japan is independent from the government. The president of the bank is chosen by the prime minister. So you're supposed to have that wall of anonymity. But he is pretty much towing the line of Mr. Kishida for a loose monetary policy, so that the problem here is that it's not helping with inflation. It actually is exacerbating inflation. And Mr. Kishida's strategy, and supported by the Bank of Japan, is that we can get out of this if we just jigger the economy, if we give people more hope and give them a reason to spend their money. Japan has so many trillions of dollars in pillowcases and under mattresses and just held in bank accounts that is not jiggering, it's not infusing the economy at all. And this new capitalism that Mr. Kishida is talking about really focuses on releasing that money. How you do that, how you get people who are normally risk averse for taking the money that they have saved. It gets very little interest, maybe 1% or 2% when you keep it in the bank, to get it to produce income for you. Even, in a normal situation, and you're a successful investor, 12, 15, 20% return on your investment is not unheard of. People, maybe they don't believe it, or they're waiting for something better, but there's something that the Japanese administration, the Kishida administration, needs to do to turn that over. He is focusing on startup companies. He is focusing on trying to make Japan a more attractive investment environment. He and also the governor of Tokyo are both working diligently on that. Korea, I'm sorry, Hong Kong, the investment community there is searching for a place to go. Doesn't look like they're going to go to Malaysia. Singapore is becoming crowded, and the people who live in Singapore, who are Singaporean, are beginning to chafe a little bit at all these foreigners that are coming in when they have the same skills, they've got the same degrees, they've gone to the same schools. What the hell is it with these foreigners? So there's a little bit of a tiredness that's going on there. Japan is a viable place. It's just that it's got some really deep-seated issues in making it more of a robust place to do business. Sorry for going on so long. These are the top issues that are hitting my radar, Maya. And so I'd like to open it up to questions and answers and hear other people's points of view and feed some of the Seahawks here. You should turn on your mic.
Thank you once again. Yes, my mic is on Clubhouse and not here. So thank you, Timothy. Yes, thank you for the great briefing. Please move to Clubhouse now so that we can continue the discussion there. Yes, thank you for choosing the beautiful view as well. Very nice indeed. And well, there are quite a few things I would like to talk about when we move to Clubhouse.
God.
Yeah, I know. So please stick with me there too.
I will. So I'll sign off here. I'll go over to the Clubhouse part and we'll continue this dialogue, okay?
Yes, please do. Okay, thank you. So see you over
Maya.
there.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.